Welcome back to Sail Hub. This week we are talking about the well-awaited Ocean Globe Race.
This has been 30 years since something like this has happened.
It is essentially a retro race.
If you're looking for something to follow, you're interested in racing but you're not too interested in carbon fibre and foils, you want something more traditional, we're going to tell you all about that today.
We're going to tell you where it comes from, where it originates from,
The kind of boats that are involved and why they're like that.
and a little bit of the action in the run-up to the kick-off, which is pretty soon. We're talking...
Days.
Yeah.
And right at the end, we're going to chuck something in which I find really interesting about this whole setup, but you're going to have to wait for on that because it's just cool, I think.
The route is obviously around the world route, and it spans 27,000 miles.
It's a massive trip, a full round the world trip. Starts in the UK, in Southampton, and it goes round the 3 capes. So that basically means down to South Africa, round the Cape of Good Hope, over to Australia, round the bottom of Cape Lewin, and then up to South America, where it goes round the iconic Cape Horn, and then after that the guys have to make it all the way north, back to the UK, to Southampton.
So it's basically the old Clipper route.
It
Which
is.
is pretty cool. And it's split into 4 legs, so we've got 3 stop-offs.
Yeah. Can we talk about the boat?
Let's talk about the boats.
Okay, so moving on to the boat. Basically, anything designed before 1988 is what qualifies. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Always taking a whip round back to the whipbread race.
Yeah, so that's basically fully crewed racing. That's what we're talking about here. So unlike the more modern racing that we see a lot of, where it's sort of single-handed, double-handed endurance fest, this is kind of going back to fully crewed boats which are pushing it hard as hell the whole time. But what I like about it the most is that it's kind of traditional, right?
Yeah, I really like it that it's like bringing it back to normality for cruisers. Like, you can almost envision yourself on this race yourself if you were nuts enough.
Yeah, so we've got no foils and stuff like that, yeah?
Yeah, no foils, no high-tech gear, no...
Yeah, it's basically just take a cruising yacht from the 70s, 80s, obviously it's got to be something fast and worthwhile entering, and go belting around the world as fast as you can. That's kind of the feel of it, you know? And like I say, it's something we can all relate to as sailors, part-time racers, cruisers, whatever we are. And again, because that funding's not there as well, it's not all about money. There's actually no money in the prize.
No prize money.
No prize money.
So let's talk about the equipment on board, what you're allowed and what you're not allowed, because that is what I feel significantly sets this apart from other races.
Sure, yeah. I mean, when we look at what you're actually allowed to bring on these boats, it is like a trip back in time, which again, you either like that or you don't like it. But for me, I think it brings a bit of seamanship back to it all, you know, instead of having like, you know, we're all used to looking at chart plotters and this, that and the other. No, none of that.
Hey, we're used to getting instructions from back on land from onshore tacticians.
Yeah. This is basically your navigation. Celestial navigation. That's kind of like the whole thing, right?
Yeah, so there's no GPS on board, there is electronic chart plotters, but no GPS chart plotters. These guys are going to be using celestial navigation, which is basically making your passage by following the stars and the moon and the sun, using this contraption, which is called a sextant.
Yeah, so basically everything that you've got on the boat is electrically is kind of based around the 1970s, isn't it?
So it's super basic.
Yeah, nothing fancy. I think you're not even allowed to have modern music players and things like that. Is that
No,
right?
these guys are going to be jamming to cassette players.
It's kind of like...
Not even CDs.
Retro beyond retro. I mean, the gear's like that, the electronics are like that, but again, the sails are the same. We've got no carbon Kevlar sails or anything like that.
You're only allowed to use Dacron sails.
Only Dacron sails. No Dyneema ropes, so just the usual...
low-tech ropes.
1970s ropes. So there's a hell of a lot of things to look at here. I mean, when you're belting around the world on a boat of that size with those sort of forces involved, and you're racing a course, and you get however many people on that boat pushing it all of the time, your gear takes a beating, and when it isn't as strong as what we're used to,
yeah,
it takes a bit of experience, I would say, probably to understand when things when they're reaching that braking load.
I think the biggest challenge, though, for us humans in this day and age is going to be the lack of iPhone, iPad, AirPods, nada. So because there's 4 legs, they've got stops in different ports. They are allowed them in the port, so they get sealed up 2 hours before departure in this bag. Obviously, like officially sealed, and then if that seal's broken by the time they get back, they get quite a big penalty. So,
oh my goodness, can you imagine that?
Yeah, so it's cassette player all the way.
So basically everything's from the 1970s. That's the gear you're allowed. The only change that I know of is I think now you're allowed to have a fridge.
Yeah, you're allowed a fridge. There is a whole host, like the notice of race is like really in depth. It's really cool to read actually, because there's so many ins and outs. Like, you got to do your celestial navigation, but you're not even allowed a pocket scientific calculator. There's loads of calculations for this method.
Yeah. No calculator.
Yeah.
So that's no iWatch then.
So that's written down trigonometry only, guys.
I wonder if you're allowed a Casio watch.
They probably existed.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the equipment that this race is allowed is the most interesting part for me, to be honest.
I think the only other thing that's worth bringing in there is, of course, safety matters here, and all the boats are equipped with EPIRBs and I believe tracking devices as well. So that, again, in modern day, there's no excuse not to do that. So it's good to see everyone's going to be looked after in that respect.
Yeah, no, the race organisers are big on like the world's best safety, and really interesting is they're going to have man overboard men on board. So going to be 2 people on board each boat, which are allowed to check. They are going to have a GPS plotter on there so that if there is a man overboard, they can be tracked. But they're going to have a security cover designed over them all that can be opened once a day to check for functionality.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, so moving on from that, I suppose we should take a look at the classes of the racing. Now, this is usually the boring bit as far as things go, but again, this is a relatively small race.
There's
well,
only
it's not a
3
small
classes.
race, it's a massive race, it's around the world, but there is only 3 classes.
Yeah.
Which makes it easy to follow.
And the cool thing is the name's taken after basically the most famous entries from the Whitbread, the original Whitbread race. So that is the Adventure class, which is for boats of 47 to 56 feet. Now, the Adventure class, the name was inspired by the Royal Navy entry in the original Whitbread race, who entered on a Nicholson 55.
Yeah, our second class we're going to talk about is Sayula class. That is for boats from 55 feet all the way up to 66 feet. And that class was named after the Swan 65 that won the Whitbread as well.
And the third class is the one that I find the most interesting. It's called the Flyer class, and that is for yachts that raced in the previous 3 Whitbread races. Now, bearing in mind the last race was 30 years ago.
There's been a lot of development in racing since then, but basically this is taking us back to classic looking racing, which is still super fast. Now, those boats are going to be different to the other 2 classes, and that's because those boats were built basically for the Whitbread around the world race. They are out and out racing boats, there's no question about that. Those things are fast. And they may be made out of different materials too, so you often saw the Whitbreads out of aluminium and the likes, whereas the first 2 classes we talked about, they will all be GRP boats, and they, by the rules of the race, have to be production boats as well.
Whereas the Flyer class, you're going to have aluminium yachts in there and just a bit more variety, I guess.
Not too much, because we've only got 14 boats in all of the classes in.
So we've got 14 boats in the fleet, so it's a pretty small fleet, which I'm quite excited about because it's super easy to track them, follow them, which is going to be cool. Yeah. So that's 218 people from 23 different nations.
Yeah, and the age range is massive too. We've got people coming all the way from 17 right the way up to 73 years old, which is it's a massive, massive difference there. And we've got 153 men and 65 women, of which 20% of those women are on one single boat.
Now that's pretty cool. And what's even cooler is this is the UK's only entry. Now this is a yacht under the name of Maiden.
Yep.
Now some of you may recognise Maiden from the previous Whitbread race, skipped by Tracy Edwards as a full female crew for the first time back then. Yep. Well, they're back at it with the full female crew. There's been a suspension this year to allow them to
allow them to do it, because basically there has to be a male-female mix between the boats, the crew on the boats, but they've waived that basically for Maiden, haven't they?
Yeah, for good old traditional measures, so that's really exciting for them.
Yeah.
So
why do they have that mix? I don't know.
I don't know. There'll be a reason. They've also got to have someone as young as 24 on the boat at all times as well.
Is that right?
I say at all times because they're allowed to switch crew around at each leg, a maximum of a 70% switch. So it's all going to be quite exciting.
Yeah, it certainly is.
And
yeah.
talk about excitement. Are the boats ready? I mean...
Yeah, I mean, when we start looking at preparing a boat for these sort of things, it's absolutely insane the amount of work that goes into it. You can't just buy a boat off the shelf and go and race it. A lot of work goes into it. And of course, because people are looking at racing, we're always pushing the technology, even if it is the technology from the 70s, which is basically what they are pushing. And I think it's fair to say that some people pushed it a little further than others already, starting at the Fastnet.
The Fastnet, which was only, 2 or 3 weeks ago. So let's talk about that then as an example. So we've got about 14-15 days until the start of this Ocean Globe race, and one of the entries, which is from Finland, raced in the Fastnet as a shakedown sail. And sadly they were dismasted, so we're talking a few weeks before the start of a round the world race they lost their mast.
It's kind of crazy, but I mean, to be fair, that is horrendous, and I think they're actually looking back in time again for their inspiration. They're like, it's not too bad, because was it a Whitbread race when someone lost their keel just before the event?
Well, no, again, it was the same. It was the Fastnet race. Was just before the Whitbread. They lost their keel, a boat called Drum. It was quite a dramatic capsize. And yet they made it across the start line and they actually finished third.
So there you go. These guys are still within a chance of starting and winning.
Yeah, and we've got the likes of the US skeleton crew boat called Godspeed. They have put a last minute GoFundMe appeal in to raise some funds that, I don't know, maybe they had a sponsor drop out or something. So these guys are still trying to make money to get over the start line. We've got the Australian boat called Explorer, who had last minute electrical issues. The contractor pulled out last minute, so they've had everyone on board. I think it's going to be true Whitbread style, just like the last races. People are still going to be fixing their boats on the start line.
Close to the bone, I reckon, for most people racing.
So safe to say this is going to be an epic 8-month race to follow. There's going to be a lot of excitement, a lot to get into. And you can follow it yourself. Just hop on to oceangloberace.com.
Yeah, we're going to link everything down below so you can follow the race nice and easy. Be sure to catch a start, 10th of September 2023. Starts are always epic in racing. And
1 o'clock on the 10th of September.
Yeah, this will be no exception, I'm sure. Now, we did say we were going to mention something we found quite interesting about the race, and I'm just going to tell you about that right now. So a lot of you will know about SailHub and what we do. We provide, reviews and tech sort of thoughts and that. We're really tech orientated and all the rest of it, but we have got another side to us as well. And a lot of you will know that we're really pushed on sustainability, and it's a lot more than I think any of you will actually know, but I'm not about to let that cat out of the bag right now. However, what I can say is what I love about this race is how they have managed to bring sustainability into this style of racing.
Yeah, they've really recognised, I guess, the
need for it, I guess.
The need for it within the sailing industry, yeah.
And there's only so much you can do with an old school GRP boat or a Whitbread boat because they already exist, yeah? So what they've done it with sails, and they've basically said you can have, what is it?
So 11 sails for slip rig. You've got to leave and come back with 11 sails.
That's the first thing. You have to come back with them because, sad as it is, many people would dump them if they didn't need them because it's extra weight.
It's extra weight, so they just chuck it. So that's the first thing. The second thing is if you have to go out and get a new sail at port because you've trashed it, you get quite a severe penalty.
Yeah, and then on top of that, this is the best part, I think, is that any sail that is used, which is over 8 years old, should I say, counts as a 50% of a sail. So if you have older sails, you can now have 22 sails instead of 11, which is really encouraging people to use older gear. And I think that's really important.
Really encouraging. I mean, that's just one of the in-depth examples. The only other thing I'm going to mention is there's no single-use plastic within this race on board.
There you go. Pretty cool. Okay, so I think that's it for SailHub for this week. So do follow us if you're into tech, reviews, racing, anything which involves sailing, to be quite honest with you. We're right into it. Let us know what you want us to cover as well. We'd be interested to hear about that.
Yeah, please like and subscribe. It gets us a long way.
Yeah, it really does. We love it.
And we'll see you next week.